Our first speaker this morning is Annapurna Garimella, who is an art historian and designer. Her research focuses on late medieval Indic architecture and the history and practices of the vernacular, visual and built cultures in India after independence. Annapurna is the Managing Trustee of Art, Resources and Teaching Trust, which has a research library and conducts independent research and teaching. She also heads Jackfruit Research and Design, an organization with a specialized portfolio of design research and curation. Jackfruit's recent cultural projects include Mutable, ceramic and clay art in India. Since 1947, Piramal Museum of Art in 2017 had this show. And the past has a home in the future at Dhoomimal Gallery at Connaught Place this year. Her newest books are the co-edited Marg volume titled The Contemporary Hindu Temple, Fragments for a History 2019, and The Long Arc of South Asian Art, a reader in honor of Vidya Dahejia. Designing India 1947 to the present, a face-on-a-face South Asian masks in the Vaidya collection, and Digesting the Past, the discourse of Sacralized architectural renovation in southern India, 14th to 17th centuries, are book manuscripts under preparation. Annapurna has also been a very dear friend, so I'm delighted that she could be with us here today. Annapurna, may I please invite you to give your talk.
So, first of all, I want to thank Janveer and Meera and all the staff at Prakriti Foundation for having me come. And let me put my watch here so I follow the rules. And I also want to thank David for all of his work. Okay. So I have compressed a lot to open up some few things. So I'll try to, whatever questions you have, I hope to deal with it in the session, the question and answer session. So if things seem a little compressed, please do open them up in the conversation. So Tales that Mandapas Tell begins with the work I did for my PhD, which was looking at how, I'm a trained designer, that's what my undergraduate degree was, in art history and design. So when I approach either ideas or buildings or anything, I take things apart and put them back together. That's how I approach things. So everything is material. So when I went to Hampi, you know, if all of you know here, most of you have been there, it's just like 250 square kilometers of material. Some of it is still in its lithic form, some of it is aqueous, some of it has been broken down and made into structures, some of it is painted, some of it is intangible, as they say, because there's stories and folk stories that go there, and some of them are textualized. So Vijayanagara is a place that has been, ever since Gundurao's administration and then Ramakrishna Hegde's administration as chief ministers, part of a large project called Vijayanagara Research Project. And a group of scholars, archaeologists primarily and architectural historians, a few scholars in other fields have worked on it. But, and my work would not have been possible with their work, but my work is very different because I come from a world in which Vijayanagara was very much alive as part of my childhood, even if it was just in terms of course in terms of customs, but I had no awareness of their genealogy at that young age. But in terms of like verses and ideas and ethics or something like that. So I was really puzzled by how do I bring all these bits and pieces together in the way that I think about things as a designer. So generally the story of a temple begins with the god, but today I'm not going to tell the story of gods, I'm going to tell you the story of mandapas, which is for people, right? So that's the place where I want to begin. Okay, so I'm going to keep walking back and forth because I have to show you things. So I hope you can hear me. So I'm going to show you different kinds of mandapas and take you through that. So one type of mandapa I'll show you is this, it looks like it's stellated. It looks stellated plan, but it's actually basically a square turned on its side. Another kind of mandapa is one that you're much more familiar with, which is the very long mandapa that you associate with the Rajeshwara or the Bradishwara at Tanjavur. Another kind of mandapa is a set of square mandapas built together, put together, like a railway cars, so that if here in this mandapa you get, let's say, God number 1, and then later on God number 2, and God number 3, then you don't have the same sort of axiality, you have a different kind of axiality. In a structure like this, and borrowing, this is the Virupaksha temple at Hampi, borrowing from something like the Bradishwara, you get those kinds of squares, but arranged to create that kind of axiality. It's a very interesting thing that happened in Hampi. At the first temple that was probably deeply renovated, when the Vijayanagara state was founded. And then finally, I want to just spend a little bit of time thinking about these multi-pillared, 1,000-pillared Aintal mandapas, the 1,000-pillared mandapas. And in that process, I want to tell you a few stories and then wrap it up. So let me just begin by saying how, I don't believe this anymore. How have people thought about the mandapa? And I'm proposing ways based on literary, inscriptional, architectural, and artistic material. As a portico or a hall in front of the Garbhagriha. So one of the earliest built temples we have is at Sanchi number 5, that's called there. And it's just a Garbhagriha with a small portico, and that's the beginning of a mandapa. As a structure to be added to a functioning or derelict structure without necessarily disturbing the existing shrine and its arrangements. And here is where my dissertation work was focused on, which is that an idea that is not taught in art history, but is very endemic to the discourse of temple construction is Jeevnodhara, which is to digest and put forth, literally, right? So the idea of Jeevnodhara is fundamental to early makers of religious buildings as a way of articulating and sacralizing architectural and ritual renovation and remaking. Jeevnodhara, or for renovating older structures, was perhaps a relatively recent idea in the Indic world. That means that if built temples, structural temples are maybe 5th century, Jeevnodhara is appearing as an idea around the 8th, 9th century. But it became a widespread way to think about renovation, repair, and change, and ultimately the wonder of the new across the sectarian spectrum. It also became a way for patrons, ritual specialists, and most importantly, builders of religious architecture to embody the past, the now, and the future. The regular renovation and repair of buildings also allowed novel spatial arrangements and construction techniques, such as those taken from mosques to enter Jain and Hindu temples, just as the idea of Jeevnodhara traveled with builders into the making of mosques. Such acts of sacralized renovation also became the context in which important individuals made and elevated their kinship networks to amplify their devotion, artistic work, and or stabilize and expand their political power. Mandapas were often architectural manifestations of Jeevnodhara. If you couldn't take apart the shrine, you could definitely add a mandapa. Most likely because they could be added without disturbing the earlier structure while gaining approbation for perpetuating the initial donation, as the inscriptions tell us, as long as the sun and the moon are in the skies. In the Karnataka region, which I studied the most, Jeevnodhara is distinguished from words like kattisu or madisu. So it's a separate kind of thing. In Karnataka, Jain patrons in the 8th or 9th century Common Era were most likely the first to develop a robust idea of sacralized renovation, or Jeevnodhara, which they noted in temple inscriptions as a meritorious activity. There's much here that I'm not saying, maybe in the question I can say, I'm still working on this. This was the time when Shravan Belagula's Bahubali was carved and Swayambhu Deva's Paumacharyu was composed. Eva de Klerk's translation of this text has these lines about the construction of a heavenly Samosaranu, or assembly hall, most likely accessible from all sides, a type of hypostyle hall named as Sarvato Bhadra in the Shilpa Shastras. A beautiful, holy, this is from her translation. The sentence is this: a beautiful, holy assembly hall, 12 yojanas wide, with 4 parks on its 4 sides, was constructed by the gods entirely out of gold. So repeatedly this word samosarana is used to talk about a place for congregation. And this is the life of, it's the story of the Ramayana from the Jain perspective, and focusing on Rishabha. A Kannada inscription in a temple from 1450s located in the southwestern coastal town of Mudabidri records a renovation by a Jain king whose overlord was the Vijayanagara king in Hampi. The inscription goes like this. The moonlight Keshav Raja is memorable for the great act of pouring the milk of love and nectar of kindness, giving Bhairava tribute to with his lotus-like hands. This is the underling to me he's giving the tribute to. His world-famous sister Mununapala, beautiful according to moral standards, spread prosperity in the land like Lakshmi. The ruler of Chandragupti, Mahavara Kampanna, lived in her glory and happiness. With full joy, took a vow of Jeevnodhara. From the beginning, filled and studded with Gopuras, Mahalayas, Jina Mandiras was the city of Tiruvalli. The ruler of Tiruvalli, the immense lion, strong-shouldered like Bhima, King Bhairava's brother-in-law, King Tayyappa married Lakshmivati Devi. Along with King Tayyappa and Lakshmivati Devi, King Bhairava, Chitta Bhairarasa, and all of these relationships with different kings, what I discovered when I was working on my dissertation is that Jains fight, but they don't like fighting. So a nice way of making a kingdom is get married and make more Jain people, right? Have babies and make more Jain people. So that's a consistent theme, and that's what you're hearing here, is marriage relationships and kinship networks, right? So we're there. To Bhairava, the great king, Sangama gave his true daughter. So here's that kinship network, Manikya Devi in marriage. King Tayyappa gave in his sister Nagla Devi, the ethereally beautiful, to Bhairava. So this is a standard practice. My student now, Dr. Famna Gururaja, has worked a lot in the Hoysala country, documenting these ways of making kingships. A 1398 inscription by the Vijayanagara general and Maneya Pradhana, our house minister Gundappa, speaks of a grand Jeevnodhara at the Chennakeshava temple at Belur. And this is what he says, through obviously a pandit. Be it well, the lord of the illustrious Hoysala Rashtra, the family deity of the great king of kings Vishnuvardhana, dwelling in the city of a new Vaikuntha, Belapura, that's Belur, with great benevolence, granting the 4 aims of the soul, dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, in his abode containing abundant wealth. The illustrious god Channakeshanatha was enjoying all services that were arranged by the great king Vishnuvardhana Bitti Devaraya, including Anga Ranga Bhoga. Gunda Danda Deepanatha was, after seeing that these services were reduced in the temple, foundation is in the early 12th century, and he's talking in the 14th century, were reduced in the temple, felt that restoration and renovation were necessary and took action to renovate and restore. Jeevnodharavam Madi, the customary worshipping method introduced during Vishnuvardhana's rule. And finally, a 1369 Sanskrit Hindavi inscription from the Qutub Minar in Delhi documents a repair in this way. Om, hail during the victorious reign of the illustrious Surat Adna Firoz Shahi, that's Sultan Firoz Shah, in the Samvat year 1426, the 5th day of the bright half of Falguna on Friday. The minar was renovated. The word that's used is Jinedhara. The work was completed by the grace of Sri Vishwakarma. The architect was Chahada, son of Devapala, and maternal grandson. It's broken, and then the measuring cord was dropped, and then they sell all the measurements of the repair. The craftsmen were the architects, Shilpa Sutra, were the architects Nana and Salha, the carpenter, Dharmuvanani. So, another way, so these are the sort of stories of Jinodhara that are mandapas and repairs hold. Another way that mandapas are thought about as independent structures, a gathering hall for donors, worshippers, another way, specific groups, for example, to make financial transactions in front of the deity. A 1382 inscription on a copper plate at Channakeshwar temple tells us, "We, the worshippers of the divine and illustrious lotus feet of the gods Ganeshwara and Gaureshwara," these are merchant gods, all the halaru, the Nakara Parivara, the Mumuri Danda, all the receivers of the dues and their 300 Billa subordinates or guards, together with the Holaya Jambuli of Vijayanagari, Hastinavati, Dwarasamudra, Gundi, Gutti, Penugundi, Adami, Udaygiri, Chandragiri, Mulavai, Kanchi, Padavidu, so on and on, all the way to the coastal region of Karnataka, have placed the diamond Vaisanige, the fan that you use to fan yourself, in the presence of the divine and illustrious feet of the god Virupaksha, and sitting down have agreed upon themselves with supreme affection. So this mandapa, even if the mandapa was built or not in front of Virupaksha, the imagination is of a congregational gathering to achieve this transaction. Another way in which mandapas were used was, of course, as a space for pedagogy, and a place to be awed and experience beauty, a place that shows the power of the god, the maker's prowess, and the donor's wealth and connoisseurship. Here's an inscription from Anahilavada in Gujarat from 1155, which was placed in a lecture hall associated with the temple, and recounts the beauty of the new structure through the gaze of children. Such a beautiful inscription, which stands in this temple. "Oh look, how could such a big load have been put on these pillars, tied with ketaka leaves?" Their mind filled with such amazement. The multitude of children looked with emotion at the lecture house, the word that's used is Vyakyagraha, which stands in this temple. Mandapas are also spaces for meditation or focused engagement and exchange with the deity. It's a structure to gift, a space for performance, a place to tell stories, a structure that commemorates, a place to worship, and so on. Now, just so to remind you that this was the Brihadishvara temple, and this is that monumental axiality. And of course, when you have such monumental axiality, you have a hierarchy of spaces. Who gets to be closest to the gods, right? And who gets arranged next to who, a darbar, in some sense. Another type of axiality is the one that's facilitated by this type of mandapa, which is the square mandapa, in which you start with the initial construction. So this one has the tower still on it. And then later on, another lingam is added, and then later on, another god is added. And these type of structures and this approach is very unique to Karnataka and Telangana. Not so much in Andhra, but primarily in the Kakatiya zone, the Chalukya zone, and the Hoysala zone, and all the junior kings below them, right? So this was a design innovation that happened in between the 9th and 14th century. And the square mandapa is highly flexible, where constructions don't just happen at one shot, like at the Brihadishvara, which of course was also renovated many times. So this axiality and modularity is facilitated by the fact that it's cut and dressed stone that's never mortared. So you can take things apart and put them back together, right? And the hierarchy between the gods can be adjusted. So if you leave if you don't construct another tower in front of the addition, then the first temple with the big tower has a kind of preeminence. whereas the next ones are kind of less, but not so less that a long mandapa would create, right? And many of the inscriptions about these kinds of temples talk about social assemblages between merchant associations, monks. Someone like Amritarashi was very popular, and lots of donations were made for him to sit in the mandapa. And they kind of over, let's say, 150, 200 years, 300 years, make durable and enduring economic, social, devotional structures which memorialize and perpetuate relationships. And of course, they're always acts to demonstrate artistic virtuosity and splendor. And so one inscription at a temple, Somnatha temple in Haralahandi, on the Tungabhadra says, it was expanded by King Joma. This is 1181 inscription, into a Trikuta temple. Very common to go for 3 pieces, 3 shrines. The idea of maintenance, then he talks about a Kalamukha preceptor, he talks about Vikrameshwara, which is Vishnu, Dasaveshwara, which is Shiva, Tuluveshwara, which is another complex that was added by Vikramaditya, maybe a Chalukya king, somebody else, and Chikeshwara. So this is like an assemblage of deities. And then sometimes you get them all planned this way to show the connection between 3 family members. So that's his father, his mother, and a son, all planned at the same time, and this one's at Hampi. And of course, at the Virupaksha temple, it's a Swayambhu lingam, so it just appeared, Virupaksha. It's all over this region, which I'm still working on, why Swayambhu lingas are so common here, and why so often they're Virupaksha. And why so often he's single, except at Hampi where he becomes married to Panga, right? So this is a pattern, I'm still working on this. And here, this addition of mandapas begins up till here, and then Krishnadevaraya's time here, this long mandapa is added. It's from the 16th century. So this axiality completely changes. The capacity to add new gods on the sides is closed. And this type of thinking, and I'm moving a little bit quickly because I want to have time for questions. And here they're reusing columns to create a mandapa which houses this too. And the memory of that reuse is not only available to us by the addition of these bases to elongate the height of the temple, but also the fact that even today they paint it to show the difference, right? This is intentional. People thinking about these things. And what's really, for me, interesting is when you heighten the ceiling of the mandapa, which is, we're not very tall and high structures in most of southern India till the coming of mosques and the mosques' interpretation of the mandapa, because of course it's mandapa builders who are building mosques, especially in the beginning stages, right? And is that you create a space in which maybe sound doesn't come down from the ceiling down to the floor for the person sitting inside the center of the mandapa, but is amplified and broadcast over a wide area when you lift up the ceiling like this. So this is something also that I've been working on. This is just an interior, I threw this in. So you have, like in Kutch, for example, a mosque that is not a rebuilt mandapa, it's a mosque that was based on just taking a mandapa from the local Maru Gujara style and building it. And so this is the outside, and when you go inside, what you have is where the Garbhagriha entrance might be, is the mihrab is positioned. And the mihrab is here, this is the mandapa, worship area, very small. And from the outside, that mihrab is treated in this way, also from local language. At Hampi, another new mosque is based on taking a fully square mandapa and then cutting it in half. And then this is the General Ahmed Khan who does this. And he uses this mandapa as a worship hall, and where the Garbhagriha would go, here is the mihrab. Now this is not a very high ceiling, but it's a very functional mosque. And then I'm interested in what the vision, I'm just keeping track of time. And then, of course, the Vijayanagar kings go all over, as I spoke about the Hoysala temple, that here is at Mamalpuram, where they add a mandapa in front of the Krishna, beautiful Krishna relief. And so what was a Prashasti type sculpture now becomes a mandira by the addition of this mandapa. And they do all kinds of things, for example, add antiquarian columns, so the Bhagavad lion symbol becomes the base for this column. They add a Vaishnava saint here, and here is a donor standing as a worshipper here. Or on the right-hand side is the Kolarama temple in Kolar, which is, Jain Hadley has written about it, so has Whitney Cox. Here the Jeevnodhara is really interesting because they take the older columns, they design it so that the entrance is magnified with a black stone, but they use regular granite for the other columns on the side. So there's all these design strategies that are both eulogistic and also ennobling of the divinity and the act of Jeevnodhara. So when Krishnadevaraya's time period in the 16th century, when that Mandapa was added, it created this whole new performance space at the Virupaksha temple, which then had a particular kind of column, which I will speak about briefly in the next few slides, but also creates the space for storytelling on top of the roof, which would not have been possible in the other mandapa. And then we move to structures like this, like the Lotus Mahal, which are not mandapas in front of temples, but are mandapas nonetheless. They're palaces. It's a typology. It's again a square turned on its sides to get that stellate plan. And it has this Famsana temple with so much plays going on. The Famsana temple roof, which is this stepped pyramid, plopped on top of this granite base with brick and stucco architecture, completely new materials. And what I see here happening is a desire for the new, a desire for these cusped arches, which would have had stone toranas tucked into these, which are missing now. And also, if you know, all of you know, because this is Tamil Nadu and there's so much beautiful never painting and earlier stuff, these are all frames, I think, to imagine people standing at their center. And there's a deep interest in new kinds of silhouettes, right? So, and they're also interested in these cool things like arches springing from piers. And what happens to that art? So that's there at the Lotus Mahal, and this is of course at the Jami Masjid in Gulbarga. And when you come to a temple like the Vithala temple also in Hampi, you see that this is like mandapas gone haywire, right? They're just haywire. And they're just building mandapas. They use half the pillars, they don't use them, they leave them unfinished. It's just because there's just a wasteful, well, I would use the word wasteful, kingly attitude towards material and labor, right? So they start, they leave, they go on, it doesn't work, maybe something happens, maybe there's a fight between one jiyar and another jiyar, something's happened. So all these things are happening, right? So I'm particularly interested in the Kalyana Mandapa and also the Maha Mandapa. And everybody talks about the Maha Mandapas having these musical pillars. Now I don't know if I feel really reluctant to say they need music. But what I do think is, what people grasp when they call them musical pillars, is that the building is performing. That building is designed to perform. And what I mean by that is that which is the most stable, and that's the column or the pillar, is almost evaporated by sculpture. And then to see all the sculpture, you have to move around each pillar. You have to engage with it. And in the plan itself, what happens, in the plan itself, if you look at this, you have to move around like these columns, and words like sogasu or vayara come to mind when I think of a dancer performing, right? The word in Kannada, I think, is sogasu for sogasu in Kannada. So I'm really interested in this kind of spaces. And more than anything, as I said, they want to dematerialize the massive support that such buildings require. So that, but they still want to make a monumental canopy to gather together God, performer, and audience. Now, finally, I want to come to the Sundareshwara temple. I think I have about 10 minutes left. So again, so I'm really interested more, as I said, not so much in God. I should be, but later. So this is the Ainpalo, this is the Putumanka, so I'm not going to there. Now, what I'm fascinated by is the way that these new arrangements of light and profile and silhouette are being organized so that when somebody is walking through these spaces, their mind is shifted. You cannot go to these temples without your mind being shifted. And I'm interested in how that shifting of the mind is planned. It's a designed experience. It is not an accident. And when you think about something like the Ainpal Mandapa, which Arinatha Modlea commissioned to be built in 1569, one of the things that I'm fascinated by is the way that the central aisle to the proscenium, let's call it, it's a mini mandapa and a mandapa. We're all very familiar with this format now because wedding halls are done like this, right? So it's an utsava space of a kind. Kalyan mandapas are different. Very often, Kalyan mandapa, the Vedika is in the center, and like in the Vedas, you're supposed to surround the four sides. Here it's at the very end, and it is a procession that you go down through the middle, and all the piers are sculpted, and these piers are absolutely mind-boggling. Is it supposed to stand, or are they just going to start walk out of the piers and come into your space and join the procession? So when you think about something like this Utsav Murti of Bhikshatana that's at the Thanjavur Gallery from the Chola period, or the Shiva Bhikshatana at the Brihadishwara at Gangaikonda Solapuram, or if you think about the Ainpal Mandapam and the Bhikshatana there, they're different, but they're also really all about performance, right? Just this fantastic idea of performance. And then what I'm really interested in is how the performance actually gets framed in such spaces. This is an utsavam that's happening there. And the way that donors, these are two donor sculptures here. The word in Jain terminology for a pillar, so one kind of pillar is a manastamba. It is to stop the ego. The stambas put there to stop the ego. And stambas are also aligned with human beings, right? That a person who is stranded, like when you do in Kayutsaka, you're like a pillar. When you are in a mosque worshiping, that pillar frames your worship in a hypostyle hall, because the mats are often designed in the mirab space, the carpet to fit between those two pillars. So in this way, these two donors are literally the pillars of this institution. Just like donors also put themselves on the floor, they're literally the floor that you walk on to arrive at the god. And then what I'm really fascinated by is, what's the deal with all those temples on the pillars on the other side? Why are they so plain? What were these spaces used for afterwards? Was it just that you could build really big buildings and you could command this much material? Certainly when the mandapam that was taken to the Philadelphia Museum of Art at the beginning of the 20th century, that was just temple trash. They just sold it to that lady, American lady, who put it in a cargo ship and sent it off to the United States, right? I mean, that's what's happened at Tirupati. They've dismantled vast amounts of mandapas because they want better parking or hygiene. So these things are really, now I'm going to stop and move to the conclusion. So David, Sanjay Subramanian and Belchay Narayan Rao in The Symbols of Suspense narrated the story of the Subedar's hut. They tell us this: the question that the story proposes is not essentially how real the illusion is, and for me, mandapas are often about creating illusions. How real the illusion is or can be, that is more of a question for the royal court and the poets, but how effectively illusion can be used. This is an idea that has nourished, and I'm really interested in mandapas, partly also because, from their work, because I think there's a new society coming together, being made in this Nayaka world. And these people want to be in the temple, they want to be close to power, but they can't come close to the Garbhagriha. So mandapas provide an exciting and new space to create the illusion of unity, which will This is an idea that has nourished my work on mandapas, helping me think about how one word or one typology can offer so many possibilities, and how builders have designed mandapas as a means to suit the diverse ends of their patrons. Simultaneously, Vemanna's verse, this is what comes to you if you grow up in Andhra as a young child, has also stayed with me. It helps me, the verse is Uppu Kappurangu Vakkapolikanundu Chuda Chuda Vachana Jadave Purushalandu Punya Purushada Vereya Visvadavirama Vinodavema. So this is basically saying camphor and salt look the same, but only when you taste it you know the difference. Just like that, all men look the same, but only when you get to know them. Purushalandu Punya Purushada Vereya, you understand who's the better person, the meritorious person. So here I'm really interested in my own ideas, how a verse like this can test my own, the fact that I'm lured by this architecture in this temple. So it tells me how things can appear to be one thing, but digging deeper and gaining intimacy, I'm done. Gaining intimacy can reveal more information. And here I want to just also say that this poem that they published was so important because it says how dangerous recognition from power is for craftspeople, right? I can make poems, and I see that in my world today when I think about what's happening in Delhi and so many parts of Varanasi. I can make poems and I can't make them very good, but if I work at it, I'll make them good. You're a conquering king, your enemies surrender crowns at your feet. What then do you want from me? I can achieve poetry, read or lead. And this is the story at the Siddhpur temple, where the Sutta community even today tells the story that when Mularaja in the 11th century asked this temple to be constructed, they were brilliant. But when he didn't finish it, when the grandson asked him to finish it, he was so jealous of their intellect, their creativity, he cut, one version says he cut one hand off of the main sutta, or all the hands off. Or in the case of Kalpura and Kalurti, who are two Bhutas, in which his father made Shravan Belgola, he made mandapas, he made structures at Velur and Karkala, and when the kings were so jealous of wanting to control that creativity, he cut off his hand. And today Kalpura and his sister said, why do you want to live in this awful world so they both die? But they're worshipped. But the way that this Buddha is represented is with white spots, which are the chisel marks that his chisel would have made. And I want to just, so the lure of craft is this, that it pulls us, it pulls kings, it pulls power, and it also holds its makers very tightly in its embrace. And so when you see a place like this, you wonder what people want to do with piles of rocks. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Are we taking questions now? From?
I'm sorry, I put a lot of stuff in there. Yes, please, David.
So, thank you. Rich panoramic tour of South Asia via the Mandapas. I wanted to say something about, if I heard correctly, something that I think you said just in passing. In any case, I'd like to know what you think about this. We tend to think about mandapas as being spatial achievements in which they're organizing space. But I think I heard you say that actually they're about time, that they're a kind of time. And you've given us several images. Makes you wonder if indeed time is what is crystallizing into a mandapa. Not every mandapa, but let's say crystallizing into a mandapa. So there are these rectangular ones that can also be stretched out, and they tend to come with gaps and breaks. That's one kind of time. There's the circular one, like the Vajreshwara thing that you mentioned in Kutch, that would be a different kind of time. You wonder what they were thinking of. And also, along with that, I think the story you're telling us of a process of autonomization of the mandapa, because in most of the temples that you showed us from the, let's say, late medieval, early modern period, the mandapas become actually more important than the sanctum, are they not? They're kind of a ground for experimentation. If you think of it as an attempt to rethink what time would be and then therefore experience these different temporalities, maybe it would be a way to make sense of some of the questions that you raised.
Should I say something? So, absolutely. I think that temple builders learned from basadi builders and from mosque builders. And they brought back that knowledge from that experience into the temple to make mandapas. So temple builders were first builders of mosques and basadis. Temple builders could also be mosque builders. So in Gujarat, they textualized it in a Maru Gujara Shilpa Shastra text, and they called it Rahmana Prasada. Right? And they're very ruled. Like, you put two pillars, one pillar on each side of the mihrab, and you distinguish it. So there is a sense that time and space work differently in different kinds of religious sectarian. The word they use in that particular text is darshana. They say that same format should be followed for Nastikas, for Bauddhas, for Arhats, the Jainas, these proportions and types of structures. So in the weirdly in Vijayanagara period there's no Shilpa Shastras. So a lot of this idea of space being held together is also about time, because they're very interested in engaging with the idea of time when they think about Jeevanoddhara. And Jeevanoddhara itself is about time in the Jain context, because kalpas go in circles and you have to find the upswing. And you have to do things that keep the upswing. And one of the things you do, to put it very crudely and simply, is Jeevanoddhara. That's what I've learned so far. And time is also embodied in the way that the body moves through these mandapas. Either the straight trajectory or moving around in different ways, or even if there's a performance, a song, and a dance, they will still you in that space. So definitely time is part of that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for enlightening us about the importance of mandapas. I'm supposed to have done a PhD on Hindu temple, but I didn't know that these mandapas have such a big story to tell. You have mentioned a lot about Jain being important component in these mandapa constructions. In Tamil Nadu, the Jains are supposed to have been chased out, and how come they? Sort of being a sociologist, I'm interested in how the Jains went to Karnataka. They were patronized, or they were sort of at least tolerated, or they even were prestigious. I was just wondering.
I'm not the person of that level of knowledge to answer your question well, but I think that many places, the story of Melkote, for example, for example, near Shravan Belgola and in Hassan district, the idea is that the Sri Vaishnavas were chased out and the Jains were chased out, and they found places to institutional spaces, kings that were willing to support them. For example, a big story about Vishnuvardhana, the Hoysala king's wife, is that she came from a Jain family. And whatever we see among the inscriptions that I mentioned Dr. Samna Guriraja has done, Jains and other non-Jains, royal families, chieftain families married all the time. And they switched. So in the Vijayanagara period, I've traced the lineage of a general, his nephew. They're Jain, they build Jain temples, but they also do donations at places like the Chandakeshwara and say that. So, and you build your lineage through Jeevanoddhara by putting your name I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, my uncle did this, my father did this. I have spoken to Vidya the Hedja. Do you know Dhara is not a word she has encountered, let's say in the context of Senvi and Mahadevi redoing brick temples into stone temples. That word is not used there. So it's very common in the Shaiva context and in the Jaina context in Karnataka. That much I can tell you. So, and
It's also interesting that the religion is so austere, but then they went berserk in building those very, very.
so what I have learned from the inscriptions, what people tell us even after all these centuries is, it's important to shed, and shed beautifully. Shed your wealth and shed it beautifully. That's what they say. At places like Mutable, and what's even more intense, come back to your point, is the Kalpura and Kalurti story of such violence, of cutting off somebody's not only livelihood but their talent, is done in the name of a Jain king and the creation of a Jain monument. But it's not unique to Jain buildings, or it's all over India, these kinds of stories about craft. The possession of that talent is a danger.
Thank you for this talk. I just had one question, that we know that in society there's always existed a form of hierarchy, and you mentioned about sanctum being treated closer to a darbar where there's proximity of who will be closer to the god. In terms of mandapa, are there any textual references wherein we know that certain portions of the mandapa were approachable to certain class of society? Because likewise I noticed in Lepakshi, wherein the Natya mandapa has been heavily sculpted. But as you move closer towards the end, the sculpture also, like the density of the sculptures used have slowly moved down. So are there any references wherein we know how people from different hierarchy within the society approach the temple, and where were they supposed to worship the god from, something like that?
So I do exactly what you did. In fact, there's very few things that tell us how mandapas were used. So I've tried to understand, I've tried to understand mandapas. The way that you made an observation at Lepakshi, that the amount of resources and work that's invested in a certain kind of space suggests a certain kind of activity. And that's evident even at almost every place. But there is a certain kind of other evidence which tells us. So if you go into a square mandapa in Karnataka, you will see a circle at the center of the main mandapa before the Garbhagriha. And you will see a domed ceiling. It's a corbel dome, but it's nevertheless a domed ceiling. And that circle is about 1.5 inches higher than the rest of the floor. So the floor level might be 2 inches, sometimes there's a square within the square, then a circle within the inner square, and all these are just the floor level differences, are just 2 to 1 inch differences. And at the center, I made very basic recordings. When you stand at the center of that circle and at the center of the dome, sound is almost like a line passing through your body. So when inscriptions talk to us about, like, Amritarashi was sitting in front of Gaureshwara and doing this kind, my imagination takes me that he might sit there. So if you read, like, say, someone like David Lorenzen, or the research of Tamara Sears and the work she's done on the Matamainga monasteries in Madhya Pradesh and in Jharkhand, you can understand that these are some of the ways in which sound was created to facilitate certain kinds of people and their activities, or certain kind of activities and people. And whether, coming back to hierarchy, the square mandapas don't allow much in them. I mean, like when I take students, maybe 20 people can be there comfortably in the periphery. In the center, only one person can be there, maybe two, but really in the periphery, about 20 people. Granted, we're larger than people would have been before, but still, it's only about 20 people. And many of these temples don't even have production bakas. So they're not meant for that kind of circumambulation. They're primarily meant for memorializing. Like the one I showed you at Hampi of the father, son, mother. So that doesn't even have a production baka. So these ways you can gradually build up a picture. And then of course the inscriptions tell us and there's a lot of cooked up inscriptions in the Vijayanagara period, fake copper plate inscriptions. Some other people have worked on them, not me. They posit this kind of proximity to the king and to the god to gain hierarchy. Right? If you're hooking up that inscription on a copper plate, you want to gain something. Right? I think my time is up. Thank you so much.